welcome back to Meet Me in the Middle. We are here, Lindsay and I are here with Dr. David Blackwell. This is part 3. So make sure you go back and hear part 1 and 2, but I'm going to reread a little bit of bio for Dr. Blackwell here. And Dr. Blackwell is actually a very good friend of mine and my husband, so I'll call him David from here on out. But just to let you know, as we go into this episode, which is going to be dealing with COVID-19 and vaccine safety and hope, I want to say this episode is about hope. This episode is a positive episode, okay? Hopefully this will answer some questions for those who might have some hesitancy with the vaccine, or some questions just about the whole COVID-19 process and pandemic. We're here to bring hope today, and help from someone who has a lot more knowledge than we do. David Blackwell is the Senior Director, Drug Safety Research and Development within the Worldwide Research, Development and Medical Division of Pfizer, Incorporated. I think everybody's heard of them, where he serves as a General Toxicology Lead and has over 30 years of experience in drug development. He contributes to Pfizer by assessing and communicating safety concerns throughout the life cycle of drug and vaccine candidates. Okay, with that little piece, and there's so much more, and you're welcome to, throw some questions at us later that we will send on to David. But David, we just want to talk about COVID-19. Everybody knows about. We're all probably tired of hearing about it. What has it been, 18 months or something now, or more at this point, that we have all been living through this pandemic. I want to talk about 2 things, and man, you can get on a roll with this, but specifically how COVID-19, it seems from what I have heard that it has affected the minority population severely, or possibly, and talk about that, because I don't want to just say stuff that I don't have the facts to back it up. So tell me if that is true, if that is what's happening. The other thing that we want to talk about, and I have a few questions later on about the vaccination, and since you were a part of Pfizer's process to produce the Pfizer vaccine, tell us about the efficacy of the present options, what you've seen, and how can you reassure the general public, as well as people close to our heart, followers of Jesus, who are concerned based on a lot of other information that is just all out there right now. Whew. Okay.
That's a long question, Joy.
I think I'm just gonna sit back and sip my tea now. And wow, start somewhere with us, David.
Sure. So I think I'll start with, what you started with, which is about how the pandemic has impacted the African-American community. I think in general, there's a couple, of reasons of why that's the case. Number one, I think early on was because, you have a large proportion of your African-American population who are essential workers, right? Depending how you define that, I'll define it as someone who has to go to work every day and usually interface with the public. That could be on mass transit, that could be in a store, in a restaurant, in a hotel, in a hospital, wherever you might find people. Typically, you find African Americans who are working in those roles of facing the public. So therefore, there's a higher chance of being exposed, right? Because it's a very contagious virus, and it travels in the air, and so it just makes sense that and again, early days there wasn't a lot of consistency on masking, etc. So not that masks could stop it, but it would help slow the spread, right? So everyone said, and it's true, because again, the way the virus is transmitted is through air, and how it goes from person to person is on particles that we breathe out, right? Which usually have mucus or other droplets that we call them, nice term. So they're heavy, right? And so the virus itself is very light. It will probably float for a long way, but because they're attached to something that doesn't float so far, having a mask in place prevents that spread, because when we speak, we spray, right? And the mask will stop that, particularly if it has multiple layers, right? It doesn't have to be an N95, which is, by definition, stops 95% of particles that go through at a certain micrometer size. But any kind of mask, right, will help. That's why they say even wear a bandana, as thin as they are, it'll help stop the spray, right? Because that's the problem. It won't stop the virus, but it'll stop the droplets. So if you have a mask and the other person has a mask, there's even less chance that something's going to go from me to you, right? Because it's just, I don't know what to say. It just makes sense, right? It makes sense. And in some cases, where, you may be very susceptible, you may want to wear more than one mask, right? Because again, two masks are better than one. It just is. I know it's hard to breathe, but that's because, there's less getting through there, which, virus is transmitted. So it all makes sense. And I think most people understand that. But I think that's number one reason why, at least initially, there were so many more African Americans that were impacted than non, because of the jobs that we typically have.
Okay.
Number two is the fact that, there is mistrust, right? Even when it comes to masking, yeah, they're telling me I need to wear a mask. They're just trying to kill me or suffocate me or whatever. And again, I'm not trying to be flippant about that. It's just that that's what happens, right? When there's distrust, is that you don't really believe anything that anyone's telling you to do, because why are they telling me to do that? And I think that's where it's gotten with the vaccination. I know that wasn't part of your question, but it kind of was.
Yes.
Is that someone is telling me I need to do it, and now they're actually mandating that I do it. It must not be good for me, because this is what my barber said, when has the government ever mandated something that was good for me? And I said, I can't argue with that. I'm sure there are exceptions, but right now at this moment, I cannot come up with one. But again, I try to come back with, I hear you, and all I can say for myself, I cannot live life that way. I have to trust someone, as you have to trust someone when it comes, let's just pick our food supply, right? USDA certified when it comes to beef or other things, meats. So there is a veterinarian like myself who is in those plants to make sure they don't pull every animal, but every so often they pull a number, so that, percentage wise, looking at statistics, there should not be anything that gets in the food chain that's untoward. And we know sometimes it does, right? There's recalls on lettuce and whatever because of salmonella or E. coli, etc. So it happens. But I personally feel much better that someone is there looking, someone is testing, and so that we do get the recalls when there's a problem, right? I feel better than that someone said, oh, it's okay, it'll be all right. Just wash it off, it'll be fine. I would prefer someone to tell me that it's not good for you, you shouldn't eat it, take it back, whatever. So I've got to trust my government, right? I recognize it's not perfect. There are a lot of things we could do better, but I think it's designed and does a fairly good job of delivering, number one responsibility of government, I think, is taking care of the health of its people, right? And the same thing about a water supply, right? We try to have, a safe water supply. I think the government and regulations do a good job of that. Those are the basic needs, right? The other one is air. And there are guidelines for air, right? Some people like to push that guideline a little bit farther and say, oh, do you really need that much clean air? Or do we need to cut emissions this much? I know, Lindsay, being from California, you're probably sick of all the, emission standards that are out there, but they've got a big state, and they, particularly now with the wildfires, have a big problem, right? Clean air is not just something you just can manufacture.
Right.
So I say all that to say, all I could do is try to reassure my barber that I understand your point, but there are laws and rules and regulations in place. Not that sometimes they're not skirted and people get by with stuff, but the vast majority of what we eat, what we drink, and the air that we breathe is better than most places that you go because of the regulations that we put in place.
How do people respond to that when you say, if you say, well, you don't really know everything that's in your food.
Of course not.
The medications that you take, a lot of people don't research the side effects of medication, but
Right.
the vaccine is just like, ooh,
right. But to the point, all I can say, Lindsay, is that what I know, and what I know is that there are standards in place. And I can tell you that I have personally had conversations with an FDA regulator about the safety of a compound. And he's not concerned about, does it work? He's not concerned if we're going to make money on it. His number one concern was, if I sign off on this, am I putting people at risk? And it's even bigger for food animal drugs because, again, once it gets in the food chain, it's not a prescription from your doctor, it's in the food chain, right? So it's even more important that what gets in the food chain is well understood, and that there are no concerns, because, again, no one signed up to be treated with a drug that's in an animal, right? That's not how we live. So his number one responsibility was, can you assure me, because he's got the cookie, all I can convince him with is the data and the scientific knowledge that we have about the drug. He's got to make a call then saying, okay, is that enough to protect the public? Because that's my number one and only concern and responsibility, is to protect the public. So I can tell you from a personal experience that folks who are on those jobs at the FDA and other regulatory bodies take their job seriously, because they understand the responsibility that they have. And so I can't guarantee that, everyone every day has a great day and nothing ever bad happens. But I can tell you, like I talked about Dr. Fauci, and I mentioned that for a purpose, that people who go into these areas, they could do so many other things. They decide to go into public service because that's what they do. And I'm going to pick on you, Lindsay. You are in social work. I've been around folks in social work because my office at the clinic at St. Hope was right next door to a social worker. And I can tell, I knew how hard they worked to try to give every benefit they possibly could get for their clients, whether it was housing, whether it was pay their electric bill, anything and everything they could possibly do to help that client, they would do. However, they can only do what the client would allow them to do, right? They can only, here it is, I've made this call for you, I've done this, you now have to go and do this, you now have to do this. And that's on them. It's on them.
Great point.
So all I can say is the work that I do, the work that my colleagues do, we do it because we love it. We do it because we love, science is pretty cut and dried. Yeah, we get some shades of gray, but either the experiment works or it doesn't. You design the experiment before you run the experiment, and you set the criteria before you run the experiment, so that when you get the answer, you're not saying, well, it could be good. No, it's either good or it's not. Did it make the criteria or did it not? It's a yes or no answer. There may be, well, it kind of did, so we might have run another experiment or redesign an experiment. For that experiment, there is a hypothesis, and you test the hypothesis. That's a scientific method. And either whether it's a null hypothesis or it's a positive hypothesis. That's what you do every day, and you rerun the experiment. It's no different if I'm in the lab, in a test tube, or in an animal, or in a human. There are criteria that are set, and you either make it or you don't. And that's why when it comes, like, for instance, let's talk about the vaccine just for a minute, because I think that was in the question. When all the data came in, right, and it went to the FDA, and everyone's kind of waiting to see, because, again, double-blind, placebo-controlled, even for the vaccine. So the people didn't know what they were getting. The people who administered didn't know what they were getting. It's all coded in, the computer tells you based on how the data, come out. So, and again, I sent a link to Joy about, it kind of talks about the Pfizer experience, at least, and it's not any different for any other pharmaceutical, whether it's Johnson & Johnson or Moderna or AstraZeneca or whoever makes the vaccine or the drug. They were waiting, and it shows in this video about Mission Possible, the search for a vaccine, when they're in the conference room waiting for the results, because they don't know. Nobody knows. And they got the word because the blind was broken, and then they found out who got placebo, who got the active drug or the active vaccine, and how did they do with infection rate. And they found out, again, in Pfizer's case, that it was more than 90% efficacious, right? Which is unheard of for any kind of therapy, let alone a prevention vaccine, right? It's just out the charts. And so you'll see how excited they are about it, because I think as you'll hear in the video, the standard, what the WHO and I think of the FDA kind of set as a benchmark, and they said it was a high bar, was like 60%. So if it was greater than 60 or 60 or greater, they would approve it, for emergency use. And it wound up being 90 plus. It's like, that was just out of the roof, right? So I just want people to understand how, we all worked really hard on that vaccine. My lab particularly did the testing to make sure it was safe to go into clinical trials. And so we, worked very hard in parallel with the FDA. So part of the reason why it went so fast, and it may be a question you're going to ask, Joyce, so since I'm on the roll, I'm going to tell you now.
Tell me now.
A couple reasons. Number one is because of SARS and MERS. You might remember back in around 2008, 2009, 2010, there was a SARS situation, right? And it stands for sudden acute respiratory syndrome. And then after SARS kind of went away, because the coronavirus that was involved with SARS was not as infectious as COVID-19. So it didn't do well, outside of the human host. So it died off, which is great. Then MERS came along, which was called Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. And it was similar to SARS, but a little bit different, and then the coronavirus. But because of SARS and MERS, it kind of gave us, not just us Pfizer, but other researchers saying, hey, everybody knows another pandemic is coming. Ebola could get there, but hopefully it can be contained. When SARS kind of hits, like, hey, this is another airborne virus. It could be easily transmitted like influenza was in the early 1900s. So those research has already started. And that's where the whole RNA technology started, as far as how can we do a better job of discovering and developing vaccines. Because as you may know, historically, how vaccines work is that you create the virus, or you translate the virus from wherever you get it from, whether it's an animal or from a lab somewhere, and you amplify it, usually through eggs. And so that's why when you usually get the flu vaccine, you say, or do you have an egg allergy? Because they use special hens that lays very controlled, again, this is all very controlled environment because you don't want any contamination involved. Eggs that are then infected with the virus, and you grow the virus there, and then you start, taking it and you dilute it out and you make all your vaccines, right? Well, that's a little bit, it's old school. It gets started like in the 40s or 30s, right? So it works, but with technology comes hopefully some improvements, right? So with technology of being able to generate gene material, that's we're doing that for gene therapies now for people with diseases that were basically can cure them. Hepatitis C, is a 1 or 2 dose cure, which is amazing, right? Because it was not that way before.
Right.
But anyway, so with new technology, we're able to do RNA virus, not virus, but the protein that's associated with the virus production, so that you can basically use that instead of a live virus or a modified live or killed virus. So there's no viral particles at all in the RNA vaccines, whether that be Pfizer's or Moderna's. Johnson & Johnson uses a little different technology, which is kind of more older school, but not that old. So anyway, it was because of SARS and MERS back in, around 2008, 9, 10 that we started that whole process. Now we'll fast forward again. To me, it's a God thing. People would look at it differently and say what they want to say. But, this is the verse I love and I hold on to, is John 10:10. And I think most people understand what that says. It says that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But I am here to bring life and to bring it to the full. And for those of you like me who like your Bible, the pages that turn, that's a red letter right there. That's Jesus talking. He said, I came to give life and to give life to the full. And so to me, this is just, whether it's the snake on the pole for numbers, or we're talking now with the vaccine, this is a gift from God. You can say what you want, but as someone who's been doing this work for 30 years, there is no way this could not have happened unless God put the pieces in place. And part of this I'm going to tell you, and you can watch on the video again, Mission Possible, the search for a vaccine. is we had a relationship with BioNTech in Germany, a very small company, very brilliant people, because they were using RNA technology to work on a flu vaccine. And we are currently working on that now as we speak in our laboratories. Clinical trials have already started on using RNA technology for flu. So we had a head start, and that's why we were able to go so fast, because we already had a relationship with BioNTech for the flu vaccine. And when COVID came, and you'll hear the story again in the video, there was an opportunity to say, hey, can we use the same technology for COVID-19? In particular, since, again, you can say what you want about China, but they were involved along with WHO in getting the genetic code for the COVID-19 virus. So once you have the genetic code, then you know how to counteract that code and block it from the attaching of the COVID-19 spike. And you've heard a lot about the COVID-19, and you've seen the molecule with little spikes sticking out, and that's how it attaches to the cells and embeds its material into our cells and infects us. And so the goal is with the RNA vaccine is that you block that attachment of the spike protein to our cells by having antibodies that we generate, because we have, so the COVID-19 RNA vaccines do not have any virus parts all in them. It's all just the genetic code from the spike protein that has been injected into you, so that your body makes an antibodies to that spike protein, so that when you are potentially come in contact with someone with COVID-19 and you get infected with COVID-19, your antibodies will not allow that virus to attach to your cells, and you're protected. So it's just like looking at the snake, look and live. Your cells, they look and they live, and they don't get attached by the COVID-19 virus. So that is how it happened so fast for Pfizer. We had a head start with BioNTech. The fact that we had the genetic code in early of last year, like January, February of last year, we were able to use that and start making potential vaccines for it. And as you'll see in the video, we had 4 that we were looking at. They ultimately wound up picking 1. We actually tested 2 in my laboratory because we didn't know which one at that time. So we did twice the amount of work, because we wanted, again, do things in parallel, not in sequence. Right. They were making 4 batches of vaccine because they didn't know which one was going to be the one. So they had to make them up to a certain point, all of them, right? Because you can't wait. And also why we were able to go so fast was because we worked in concert with the FDA. Not that they believed everything we said, but as we got data that was draft, which typically we would not give them draft data because we want to make sure that all the I's were dotted, all the T's were crossed, which takes time. We didn't want to waste that time. They said, we will take the data and we'll wait for the reports, because that's our assessment of the data. The data are the data. Either they show, what they show, or they don't. You can't spin it any way you want to. The data are the data. So they were willing to take the data, raw data itself, and start their evaluation. We were able to finish the reports. We gave them final reports. All the data went into from the clinical trials as well, the same way, right? So we recruited over 30,000 people in the US in our trials, even more worldwide. So it wasn't just a US thing. We had sites in South Africa, in Europe. I think there were 4 main sites for the pivotal phase 3 trial, which I talked about earlier in one of the previous segments. You have to go back if you're starting with part 3, you got to go back to part 1. I'll tell you about drug development there. So I'm not going to redo it here. But phase 3 was the pivotal one, where we had over 30,000 participants, about half on placebo and half on active, because you don't want to skew your results. So you need to be able to test it robustly. And I will say, because it's one of the questions I get a lot, again, because it's a God thing, in my opinion. You don't have to agree with me, but because for the last 10 plus years, we at Pfizer and other research organizations have been really actively trying to get more minorities involved in clinical trials, which I mentioned earlier when I went to St. Hope. That's what I did. So I had a passion for that. And so working with pharma, which is the bigger organization that most pharmaceutical companies belong to, they kind of have we work together in some areas in trying to get word out, like clinical trials. There was an initiative that pharma put out working with the National Medical Association, or the NMA. And the NMA, in a brief nutshell, is the Association of Black Doctors and Health Professionals that existed because initially they weren't part of AMA. the American Medical Association would not allow them to be members because of segregation and all the racial issues that we all know about. It's real, folks. So don't pretend like it doesn't exist. It's always existed, and most of the stuff is intentional. Nonetheless, off that rabbit path, but because
Okay.
the AMA would not allow Black doctors to join, they made their own association. It's called the National Medical Association. It's been in existence for over 100 years. And the National Medical Association partnered with pharma to work on getting the word out to try to get more Black investigators and more Black participants in the clinical trials. And so we've been working on this for years. And so finally, when we really, really, really needed it, not that we don't need it before that, but I'll just give an example. An article I read, it was about this time last year, in a clinical trial, nothing fancy, a typical clinical trial looking at typical endpoints for African Americans. I think it was a drug for either hypertension or for diabetes. The normal percentage of African Americans that they can get enrolled is somewhere between 4 and 6%. That's just the best they can do, despite all the efforts, working with Black investigators and going to areas where Black people live. It's hard to recruit people of color into clinical trials. But we've been working at it. And because of that work, when we recruited, it was intentional. We wanted to make sure we had representation because we knew there would be this issue with hesitancy, particularly with the Black population. We were able to recruit approximately 10% of the population that was in that phase 3 clinical trial. And it was, I think, the same for Moderna and Johnson & Johnson, were African Americans. So, the Black population in the US is somewhere around 13%. So not quite at the percentage for the country, but not much better than 4 to 6, right? So 10% of the folks in the trial were African American. So I say that to say we intentionally wanted people of color involved so that when we got the results, it would be not just, okay, we didn't look or we don't know, if there's any differences in people of color as far as how it's going to react, if it's more safe or less safe or more efficacious or less efficacious. They were part of that. And so you can break that data out if you want to, but in the day, they were representative into the study, and they were also representative as far as the side effects and the efficacy endpoints. So there was nothing unique about that population, our population. So I'm going to stop there and see if I answered questions or if there are more questions, because I said a lot. So.
No, that was great. One question that came up, well, you answered the question well about some people, some of the hesitancy is still so new. It just seems so fast. And I feel like you answered that. It really isn't that new. It's been in process for a while. It was just what I heard you say is it's been more specifically honed in, obviously, when COVID-19 came, but there had been some work on this for years before. Is that right?
That is correct.
So that
and continues in the fact that, this is probably going to be the new future just because it's just easier because you're not dependent on another, I'll say, stage where you don't have as much control, i.e., let's say an egg, right? You can manufacture this in a laboratory specific to the genetic code that you want, and basically it's a plug and play, right? The technology is there, and it's safe and it's efficacious. So, and I would say, I was going to Google before this meeting, but I didn't do that, and I apologize. I do not know how many COVID-19 vaccines have been administered. I know it's well over 200 million doses. I just don't know, how many people are fully vaccinated, et cetera. But the point is that for those who are saying that it's too new, I'm going to wait. It's like, so when is it good enough, right? You got millions of people who have been, that's just in the US, let alone in the rest of the world, who've been, vaccinated with the mRNA vaccine or the J&J or the AstraZeneca. All of them are efficacious and all of them are safe. Again, not that there aren't side effects. It's just that when you compare the side effects of the COVID-19 vaccine to the death and other sequelae, some we don't even know yet about from the natural infection, there is just no comparison. And all I say is just look and live. So go ahead, Joy.
Look and Live. That's going to be I think that's going to be the title of this one, Look and Live.
That's
We
right.
used to sing that hymn in church back in the day. Okay, what about, does this new, the mRNA, I think if I'm saying that right, does that at all, what is the word I want to say, depress your own natural immunity? So
Right.
that question or that thought came up in some stuff I was looking at,
Sure. Yeah, so I think I want to be, there are many, what I think is really interesting is that, I've been out of vet school for over 30 years. And, it's one of those things that I've always have marveled at, being a scientist and a Christian. So I'm still can't quite get my hands around how any scientist can believe that we as individuals, human beings, evolved from single cell organisms. I mean, talk about faith. There is so much we still don't understand, right? And this is 2021. It's just not possible, right? But people will hold on to that because they don't want to believe in a omnipotent God, right? So I say that because when it comes to what we know and what we don't know about the body, and I'll say this because it needs to be said because most people don't hear this, is that we as a pharmaceutical, I'll use the word giant because that's a word that people use a lot, Pfizer. We're a very large company, been around for a long time, but we are many, many, many times more unsuccessful than we are successful when it comes to drugs. So as I mentioned, it's pretty easy to do the safety side. It's really hard to do the efficacy side because the translation from animals, which is our best means right now, animal models. And again, my wife spent her life developing animal models that would kind of, be a surrogate for the disease so you could find something that would potentially work. But even rats and dogs and mice it's a huge jump from them to people, even non-human primates, as close as we are, we're not that close. So I want people to know that for a lot of reasons. Number one is that what we do is very challenging, very hard, and we're very, very unsuccessful most of the time in finding something that's safe, efficacious, and we can make. So, most of our trials, particularly phase 2, where we put them in disease patients, they don't work. Despite our best knowledge, and we think we're so smart and we got it all figured out, we got the pathway figured out, but there's another pathway we didn't know about, that we still don't know about, that somehow made our drug not efficacious, right? So why I started this, Joy, was because your question about the immune system. So what I started with 30 years ago, we knew so much more about the immune system than my colleagues who were in the first classes of Tuskegee University School of Veterinary Medicine in the early 50s, right? Because they knew about white cells and they knew about maybe a few more other, immune cells, but the whole complement and different type of interleukins and all the immune system that, again, we are still every day learning. There were like interleukin 5 when I was in vet school. Now we're up to 30 something, right? They're all unique, different. So there's so much we still don't know. So I want to say that because I don't want to sound like, I've got all the answers and I can assure people 100% that this, that, or the other. There's so much we don't know about everything, including the COVID-19 virus, let alone the vaccine that we're using to combat it. But I can tell you what we do know is that when you do the mRNA vaccine, one of the reasons why it is so safe is because it's so specific to that spike protein, and there's so little other components that are in that vaccine. You're not putting in other things that are called adjuvants, which historically have gone into vaccines like aluminum and other things that just cause your immune cells to get fired up so that they will start producing an immune response. That's really what their job is just to help create a response within your immune system. It's not specific to the virus that you are, vaccinating someone against, or in this case, the spike protein that's used to give someone some immunity. So all I can say is that from my experience, the mRNA vaccines are safe because there's so little in them besides the genetic code to the spike protein and the lipid particle that delivers that to the cells, right? So that's the main two components. There's a few other minor excipients, but compared to other vaccines, like I said, where you'd have to add some adjuvants, there's none of those in the mRNA vaccines because they're not necessary, because you're going specifically after the spike protein. And to me, the more specific I can be about, given a therapy, it's why it's so much better if you can target a receptor as opposed to given a chemotherapeutic agent, right? If you have a cancer, because chemotherapy is going to kill everything. It's not specific in killing just the cancer cells, it kills other cells, unfortunately. Whereas targeted therapies that are going after a receptor of some sort are specific to that receptor and specific to that cell. And so you don't cause the collateral damage to your other body parts. And I think that's the best example I can kind of give about, why the mRNA vaccines are, I think, so number one, efficacious, and also I'll use the word safe, although I know there are side effects compared to others.
Sure.
Yeah.
That was my, just layperson thought. And of course, because I do believe in divine creation, I think that God has created our bodies in a way that is just far beyond what we could even imagine. That fearfully and wonderfully made part. And I feel like God has just made our bodies to heal and fight, and with an immune system that, we treat our body well, it should do its job too. So no, that really helped me a lot. I just want you to, as we close up this one, I want you to speak to people who are followers of Jesus. And, I want to say, can't we all just get along? I know that we're going to have differences. We are probably the three of us here. I'm sure we don't agree on everything. We're choosing to come together and love each other through any differences. I just want to, what would you say to the people that we call, the body of Christ is a term we use for the people who are followers of Jesus. Talk to us in regards to all this.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, right? Because there has been so much that has happened together, and there's so many things that wind up being quote unquote married together that I don't think were ever intentionally designed to be married, right? And I'll use an example of myself. I very much are in favor of not restricting voter access, right? I think in this country, we should do everything possible to make it as easy as possible for people to vote. I'm all for voter integrity and making sure that people don't vote more often than they should, or that, we eliminate fraud. I think all that can happen is not by, having a poll open one day, for an election that happens every 4 years, to have the polls open for a few hours on one day. Just makes no sense. There's other countries, other places have done a better job of, of polling, right? And being able to let everyone's voice be heard. That's what a democracy is all about. I say that because that's very polarizing in the Christian community and other circles when you start talking about, issues that have become political. Masking is another one, right? It's become a very political issue. I should be free to do what I want. No one can tell me what to do. I see signs in my neighborhood about unmask our kids, and it drives me nuts, right? Because as a public health person, that's where the public comes in. The public we have to take care of each other, right? Otherwise it doesn't work. But I also say that, one of the first things I learned when I started pursuing my master's of public health is that this discussion is old as time. So one of the oldest cases ever is from like 1902, Jacobson versus the state of Massachusetts, where they were trying to mandate vaccinations. And it went to the Supreme Court. So my point is that these aren't new issues. You know, as long as you got people, you're going to have different opinions. But to your point, Joy, we got to figure out how to make this work together. So it's interesting that this kind of three-legged stool has happened with, you know, the election where some people say there was fraud, and there's, you know, the president who lost didn't lose, he really won. We've got, you know, the whole George Floyd murder situation, which, you know, to me, if that wasn't caught on video, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Things wouldn't have changed because it's been happening for years, right? But it just happened to the right person who was not afraid to, you know, to film something that was terrible to see so that the rest of the world could see and start ripping the Band-Aid off that needed to be ripped off of our country many, many, many years ago. It started post-Civil War, but then it easily got squelched by the whole Reconstruction situation that just didn't work because those in power didn't want it to work and they had the cookie, and so they changed the laws and actually made it worse, right, with Jim Crow laws. And so for 100 years we faced that until the Voting Rights Act. And I say all of that because one of the things that I think every Christian, I don't care what color you are, is you need to spend time, number one, read Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail, 1963. It's about 24 pages long. It's an easy read. Everyone needs to read that at least once a year, because the things that Dr. King talks about in 1963, when he was questioned by his fellow clergy as to why are you pushing this issue for equality? We're moving the needle, you know, it's going along. Why are you trying to add some gasoline to the fire? Because Dr. King says, you know, how long is long enough? It's 100 years since, you know, slavery was made unconstitutional. So here we are, 1963, and we still are second-class citizens by design, again, by the rules and laws of the land. The rules and the laws need to change. So the Christian community has never been on the forefront of that. There have been a few. There are a few that walked with King, but many others were happy to say, you know, as long as we aren't treating bad people poorly, it's okay. I don't care how my other brothers and sisters are suffering. Yeah, we may have church and then go see a lynching that afternoon because we want to wait till after church. But that's what happened. That's just history. And again, the church has not talked about these things. It's been swept under the rug. We just don't talk about it. So the other thing I would suggest people do, again, these are my brothers and sisters in Christ, besides reading the letters of Birmingham jail, if that doesn't get you excited, read The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. Because if that doesn't, Jamar lays it out there. The cover of Jamar's book is something that's probably near and dear to the hearts of some of your folks there in Huntsville. It's a picture of the funeral of the 4 little girls who were killed in Birmingham from the bombing. Just a few months after Dr. King had the letter to Birmingham jail. And that was intentional, right? Because again, it's a church. There was a bombing. Someone blew up a church. Does it get any worse than that? You blow up a church where your brothers and sisters in Christ are coming together to worship the same God that made us all equal. At least that's what we claim. But since then and before then, there's been a lot of segregation, mostly in the church. It's still probably the most segregated hour of the country is 11 o'clock or whatever time it is in the country. And Joy and Roger have done their part. Lindsay's doing her part. I've done my part here in Lillywhite, Connecticut. But that's what we do, right? We are here because we want to make it better, and it can be better, but we can't ignore the past. Again, there's a reason why we are here with vaccine hesitancy with African Americans, because it was earned, unfortunately, by those who did not have our best interests at heart and took advantage of us and have otherwise done all they could do to put us at a disadvantage. So that's the past. We have to go forward. That's not a reason not to get a vaccine. It's because of what happened in the past. It doesn't help that cause if you die of COVID or you have complications of COVID because we're trying to prove a point. That's, you know, look and live. I mean, Jesus, God gave us gifts that come from the Father, and I believe medicine is one of those. You know, you take your high blood pressure pills, hopefully, you take your insulin, you need to take your COVID vaccine. You know, it's just another tool in the toolbox for your healthcare protection. And again, to help equal the playing field for all of us. We all want to live. We all want to live well. Jesus came that we might have life and that we might have it to the full. And to the full means to the full. He didn't mince words. He said to the full. That means everything I give you, I want you to take advantage of. And a vaccine is one of those gifts from God. You don't have to believe me. I happen to believe that. I've been in this business a long time. I've been in ministry a long time. And sometimes you just need to hear that. And if you're wrestling with it, wrestle with God. He can take it, wrestle with him, and see where it winds up. But don't just believe everything you hear from every source. Everyone says, yeah, I've done my research. Well, you need to question, what research have you done? Have you done 30 years of research? Have you done, were you in the lab? Do you know have you looked at all the results from the vaccines are published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which you can probably easily get your hands on. Look it up. If you have questions, if you need someone to help you through that, get some help. There are people who want to help you. So I don't know. Again, I can't convince you. It's your choice. I think it should be your choice. But if you don't do it for yourself, do it for those you love and those who can't get vaccinated, right? And right now it's the kids who hopefully will be able to be vaccinated soon, but right now they can't. So yeah, and their teachers and everyone else that's, in the school system.
Now with the booster, do you think that there'll be more boosters that we have to take, or like it'll be like the flu, every year, something like that?
It's a really good question. Actually, I was in a town hall today from our president of research, right, who showed some data from the various boosters. As you know, there's conversations going on right now whether you can mix the vaccines. I think, again, the FDA will have to make that decision. I trust them and their judgment. Again, they don't have a dog in the fight, right? They're not trying to, people say, oh, they're in the pocket of the pharmaceutical companies. You have to show me where that is, because I know what, we pay a fee to get our drugs, not approved, but to get them to be evaluated, because we want them to go as fast as possible. So in order for the FDA to be able to give the resources, they have to hire more people. So we feel that we should be able to pay that. Yeah, we can help with that, right? We can help pay for more people. But that's where it stops, right? We just pay for more people to be able to evaluate our packages faster. And as you know, not every package that goes in gets approved. For instance, Pfizer said, we think that, our data show that, our data and the data from the rest of the world show that there's advantages for everyone getting a booster. FDA said, no, we don't think so. We think for those 65 and over, for those who may have pre-existing conditions or underlying, immune compromise, yes, they should get a booster. But for the rest of the population, right now, the data doesn't show that. We'll continue to give them data and they'll continue to evaluate. That's the way it should work. So we don't always get what we want. So don't believe that the FDA is in the pocket of the big pharma, because if you look at the number of drugs that are approved, believe me, everyone that gets in there, and we believe the data are good enough to meet those three criteria, that is safe, efficacious, and we can manufacture it, they frequently disagree with us. And so believe that there's integrity in the system. There are people who are out there who do have your best interest at heart and is doing their best to make things available to the public, because again, we all win. Prevention is, one of the things we learned early in veterinary medicine, and that's why they call it herd immunities, because of veterinary medicine, is that if you can vaccinate an animal and prevent them from getting sick, it is pennies on a dollar cheaper than trying to treat something that's ill. And sometimes you can't, because there's no cure or there's no treatment and they're going to die, and that's just a waste for everything. So prevention is always better. That's why you should never start smoking. If you are smoking, stop smoking, right? It's just don't inflict things in your body that don't need to be inflicted. And if you can prevent something with a vaccine, which is tell the people right now who have polio, right? I bet they wish they would have had a vaccine, right? And they just missed that opportunity. And now we don't have polio anymore. There's a reason. It's not because, it's because people took vaccines and we no longer have polio in the United States. There's a few episodes around the rest of the world, but we don't have polio because of vaccines. And the anti-vaxxers and everyone else can talk about that, but that is just fact and truth.
Ooh, okay. Oh, Lindsay, you have any more questions here? That's so good.
I don't. I think this has been such a thorough understanding and presentation of this whole subject that if I wasn't a believer before, and I was sort of, I am now. I really am now. Yeah. And what I really appreciate, David, is the Christian perspective, because that is, I know that you're going to be true to that. I know you're gonna be true to that. You know what I'm saying? So for me, that's the selling ticket for me.
Yeah.
I know that you're going to be true to God in what you do.
And the other thing is that, somewhere in scripture, I can't quote it to you right now, but we know that God has people everywhere, right?
Yes.
Everywhere, and for a reason, right? Just as Esther, for such a time as this, God has people everywhere. He knows what's going to happen. No surprise to him. Again, I think the whole SARS, MERS thing was a wake-up call. It helped us get our, ducks in a row so that when COVID-19 hit, we were able to respond quickly. Yes, more people died than needed to, but that being said, I think many more haven't died because of what, has happened over the last year or so.
Yeah. And I just want to thank you. You've been working, in the trenches, as I say, and people, I'm sure the majority of just us, people out here, I'm sure you tried to help us understand, but I'm sure we have absolutely no clue as to the depth of the process and the protocol and the things that you have to go through in order to roll out a product that as best you guys can produce is going to be safe for all of us, you guys and girls. And I just want to thank you for that. I know that working for a pharmaceutical company, you can get, the darts fired at you because everybody seems to want somebody to blame something on. That's just human nature. We all do that. And I know that you probably, have to deal with a lot of different stereotypes. And then there's the whole racial issue, and that is all intertwined. We cannot separate that, and we've got to deal with that, especially in the Christian community, because this is where, we are known by our love, right? I just want to thank you for just blazing a trail in so many ways with the health equity, with just the HIV AIDS population that you just worked so much into, with public health and then all of this. I'm just so thankful that God placed you in a position where you are for such a time as this. And I don't want to use that phrase lightly at all. But I know your lab was very instrumental in all this. And I just want to thank you for coming on with us and speaking honestly, and talking to us and giving us some more information. This has been incredible. And I just want to thank you so much. We appreciate you. And I will say with all my heart, God bless you and God bless your family. And I just appreciate all the work that you have done. And thank you for talking to us. Okay.
Absolutely. We're going to fan you, Joy. We're going to fan you. No, you know what, Dr. Blackwell, thank you so much for just talking from your heart, speaking spiritually, and not trying to sugarcoat anything. I appreciate the factual information, but also the spiritual backing of it all, because I think for our viewers that watch this, I think it's gonna turn the tide for a lot of people, and it's always a blessing to be able to be introduced to people that, like Joy said, and like you said, have been placed where God has you for such a time as this. I will continue to keep, our family will continue to keep you all in prayer, because I know that has to be a high pressure job. That's a high pressure job.
It is, but I enjoy what I do. And I'll say two more things, and I apologize for interrupting.
Go ahead.
Lindsay. Just want to get back to just again the rigor in the vaccine or in the process. So again, because no one's going to know unless I tell you. Yes. So again, as a laboratory, we're classified as a GLP, which stands for Good Laboratory Practice laboratory. And the reason why that's important, it goes back to, again, not everything that's always been done has been ethical. And so back in the early 70s and before, there would be studies that would be done that were not real studies. They were paper studies, they call them, right? And to be honest with you, this is kind of ironic. When the anti-vax movement started in Europe, it was because of a paper study that was done. So no real data was generated. And so it's interesting that, it goes back to John 10:10, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and is always a copier and one who just gives you enough truth that makes you get on the hook. And so I think, there's a common theme here, and it rhymes with Satan. So anyway, let me just say that.
Yeah, say it.
I want to talk about about the good laboratory practice. So GLPs came into existence in the 70s because not everything that was being produced was factual. And so they wanted a system in place, regulations in place. So the FDA came up with a code of regulations. It's called a Code of Federal Regulations that we follow, and we have a quality assurance organization within our organization that makes sure we follow those guidelines. But in addition to that, and they're not associated with the work we do, they're a separate entity. They have to be so that they're not partial again. But the FDA, they actually come and visit us. So every 2 to 3 years, they come and inspect our labs, and they'll spend anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 weeks looking at studies, looking at data, inspecting our laboratories, walking through, touring, etc. They leave no stone unturned, and they have our full attention. Part of my responsibility is hosting them when they come. So I know what they ask and what that's like. It's very tense. But we have nothing to hide, so we're happy to explain what we do. But not a surprise, they showed up on January 4th of 2021, right after our holiday break, to look specifically at the COVID-19 vaccine studies that we conducted to make sure that we followed GLP, that what we said is in our data is actually what happened. So they not only did they, look at the paper and the computers, but as I mentioned, we use animals in our studies, and the gold standard still for pathology is histopathology or glass slides. So we take the tissues, we make slides, and the pathologist looks at the tissues and they evaluate them. Well, they actually pulled the slides and they wanted to see for themselves the injection site areas that we, when we inject our animals, again, to show that it's safe. We're going to inject people, we have to inject animals too, right? To make sure that there's no untoward things happen. They evaluated all our data. We spent 2 weeks there, and we got a clean bill of health. There were no findings. So the FDA was there for, actually it was a week, not 2 weeks. I apologize for that overstatement. It was quite an intense time. Nonetheless, they came and they evaluated, and at the end of the day, we had no findings. So they had no concerns about our data. And basically, that they did their job, right? Because they want to make sure that they can stand behind the data, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are granting approval. So they have to, they're putting their name on it as well as we are. So it's just another check and balance to make sure that there's integrity in the work that we do. So it's not just, me or the other people in our group. It's a large number of individuals who are involved. And of course, if there's anything that's untoward that happens, everyone has the obligation and the opportunity to say something's not right here, right? And sometimes it happens, right? When people say, hey, there's something going on here that shouldn't be happening. And the investigation occurs, and usually bad things happen.
Right. Wow. Thank you again. I mean, there's just so much we make assumptions. All of us, I can say, we make assumptions of how we think things happen, or we can flippantly say, oh, blah, 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 blah. There's just so much more into it. And for me, we can, we can assume a lot of things and go to a lot of different sources to listen. But one thing that was very important to me, I thought, I'm going to go straight to the source. And I know Pfizer made this drug. So thank God, I know somebody that works there. So let's go straight there, instead of another opinion here and this opinion there. And let's go straight to the source and find out. And there's going to be, like you said, there's going to be good, there's going to be mystery, there's going to be, you know, we're all doing the best we can, but this is what I think we need to do more often, is go straight to the source, and then you can make more of your a rational and decision, and a decision based, a prayerful decision for those of us that's a part of our decision making. So again, it's a lot more complicated than any of us realize, and we need to know some of that.
And I'll say the same thing applies to clinical trials as well as to the manufacturing, right? So there's GLP for laboratories, which I do, but for the clinical, there's GCP, good clinical practice, and the same thing happens, right? Their data is inspected by the FDA. They will come on site and they'll look at all of our data again and make sure that everything that we say is true. And the same is true for the manufacturing. They'll go to the manufacturing sites and they'll inspect their data and look at their process and, you know, all their specs that they have. Everything has to line up. Otherwise, it's not, you know, it's just not good. And there's quality assurance units associated with each of those, so that we have our own internal standards and our own internal people who are looking in, as well as having the outside agencies come in and do the same thing. So there's a lot of checks and balances to make sure that the integrity of the data is there.
Yeah, and if any more questions, hey man, I can route you to Dr. Blackwell to answer some of those. And I'm gonna put probably in the description some of the links that you shared. I think that's going to be really important, again, to go to the source and to gather your information. You guys listening to part 3, you have no idea, but David has been on with us now for hours as we've done 3 different recording sessions. And I just really appreciate, of all the other work you're doing, that you took hours out of your time to talk to us. Means an awful lot. And so I'll close up there. Lindsay, close us out. Anything else, closing words from you?
Well, I just appreciate, again, you're legitimizing the whole process of what you do. And so again, knowledge is power. And so thank you for sharing that and sharing such a powerful process.
Yeah.
Of what you all go through with Pfizer and how, you know, COVID has, the vaccination has been tackled at this point. And like you said, look and live. Look and live.
Look and live. Look and live.
And let me just say one other thing, because once a drug is approved, so for instance, or a vaccine, in this case, you know, Pfizer has full FDA approval now. You can go to Freedom of Information, FOI, and there should be a summary basis of approval for any drug for, you know, or vaccine, so that you can actually look at the data that was submitted to the FDA. It's not going to be everything. That's why it's called a summary, but it's still a lot that's there. So if people really want to dig into the data, they can dig into the data. They'll see all the side effects, you know, how many patients saw this, that, and the other. All those data are there. So, and that's the reason, again, to try to be as transparent as possible. So if folks are looking for more information, they can get their hands on more information.
And that's available to the public, yes?
It is, yes. You just have to search for it, but you should be able to find it pretty easy. Just Google FOI for whatever, you know, you're looking for, and you should be able to find it.
Okay.
That's really good, because I did have that question come up from somebody about the FDA approval, and is it this US or is it just, you know, internet, anyway, whatever. Yeah. That's good. Well, I'll send them there. That again, go to the source. The source. So
you heard it here with Meet Me in the Middle with Dr. David Blackwell. And we just want to say how much we appreciate your time and attention to this matter. And we're going to share this video everywhere. It's going to go on. So thank you.
Thank you. It's quite a pleasure.
Thank you so much.